Everybody, Jaycie here. And yes, we actually are at Cartwheels and Banana Peels. We're still here. But today, we are absolutely, this whole month, we're doing something a little different. So the stories we're sharing today and the rest of this month are all about the paranormal, ghost stories, you name it. I have some really cool guests today. I'm so excited. You guys have no idea how excited I am to talk to these guys. So I want them to introduce themselves to you. Sorry about that. My neighbor's home, but I don't edit. So just so you know. So anyways, Cain, will you tell us who you are and just give us a little insight into why you're here today?
Absolutely. My name is Cain Stevens. I am a podcaster as well. I'm a podcast producer, a recording artist, as a musician, and also a paranormal investigator. So that's why I'm here. I'm a full-time dad, a stay-at-home dad, and I keep my days really busy and my nights even busier when it comes to investigating ghosts.
I freaking love it. Ben, passing the baton to you.
I don't know if I can outdo Cain. That's pretty impressive. I'm pretty awestruck right now, Cain. That's pretty cool. I'm an author. I'm also a podcaster too. My podcast is interviewing a lot of pagan authors and spiritual practitioners. So I come from that spiritual practitioner side. I'm a transpersonal therapist also. I've studied kind of Jungian transpersonal kind of eco-spirituality, all that sort of stuff. And I'm also an author. I've got a couple of books out or in the works of coming out, mostly connected to ancestral veneration and working with spirits in that way for an ancestral spiritual practice, and then completely different, the folklore of witches and magicians and other things like that. So really grounded in this paranormal stuff, as we say.
Oh my
And
love it. And for those of you that don't know, my education is in psychology, and my graduate and so forth and postgraduates in transpersonal psychology. And I had mentioned that before we started recording today. So we can see why I'm fascinated by Ben's education. I'm like intrigued. All right. So obviously I am your founder and host of Cartwheels and Banana Peels, and I work with all things stories, right? I teach about brand stories and all that stuff and how to have amazing elevator pitches. But as I said, we're diving into some really cool stuff today because I grew up in a house with activity. Nothing really necessarily scary. I have had a little bit of that, but most of mine wasn't scary, and stuff has shown up around me the most of my life. So lots and lots of stuff. And I said, we have got to have these conversations. Cain, what did you bring to my virtual kitchen table today to share with us a story or two?
Well, my story starts in West Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm smack dab in the middle of the Midwest here, and basically I started writing a book and doing some investigating in a neighborhood that I grew up in called Air Park. It's a former air base. It used to be Lincoln Air Base. There's a lot of history here, but it just so happens that from being out there as a child and staying at a lot of people's houses, people were passing ghost stories along throughout my entire childhood. We witnessed different hauntings as I stayed at people's houses, but I never really lived through it. Then later on in life, fast forward, I have young kids. I'm newly married, and we're back in these. It's basically old base housing, and instantly as we moved in, we started to have a bunch of activity. I'm talking about things moving that shouldn't move, lots of walking around, things of that nature, shadows filling up rooms where making a dark room darker than it already is. All that type of stuff. Well, one story in particular that comes to mind is there was one night where I was putting my girls to sleep. They were real young. The only way they could go to sleep is if I went and I patted them on the back, both of them. So they would both sleep on each side of the room in their little beds, and I would lay in the middle and I would just kind of pat them on the back. Well, I was doing that like every night, and they were starting to fall asleep, and I felt something kind of slick down my leg a little bit, and then I felt a hand grab my ankle and pull me backwards a little bit. And obviously, I was shocked to say the least. But my first inkling was, okay, one of the girls is up, which is ridiculous, right? Because I have my hands on them. So I whip around as if I'm going to tell them like go back to sleep, and the door's closed. There's nobody there. Something wrapped their hand around my ankle and pulled me backwards. And I mean, I'm not a small guy either, right? I mean, I'm a big guy, and it would take some force to do that. And so that's kind of how it progressed. From there, it just kind of got more and more intense, to the point where I would get woke up with something screaming my name out loud. So I said, you know what, I'm done. I'm calling a priest. Like that's what you instantly tell yourself. Is I'm gonna get a priest out here like on The Exorcist. So I rattle the Catholic Church. At first, they don't take me seriously. They're kind of like, yeah, whatever. But I keep calling. I'm persistent. And so they finally send the world's driest priest over to my house. And this guy's like a Catholic robot, right? He's walking around, he's doing the whole thing. He's not really acknowledging me in particular until we get to the basement. Okay. And then we get to the basement, and he looks around, and I'm like a horror movie paraphernalia, like collector of things. Like I'm a big Friday the 13th fan and all this stuff. And I'm a musician, and he proceeds to tell me that my lifestyle is bringing on negative entities, and so of course, I kind of, yes sir, yes father, and I shake my head. I'm not Catholic, so you can imagine how I felt about that as he judged me. But the point of that is it's not the crap, so to speak, on the Catholic Church. That's not my game. But I will say this: it wasn't my lifestyle that was inviting this. There's just flat out haunting. And so the more and more I dig into this place, and I've made it kind of my life's work in a way, through podcasting and everything else, people have started to report to me all of the different things that are in this neighborhood. And we're talking things like the Exorcist style, like Amityville stuff, like mirrors blowing up the wall, people being slapped, scratched, pushed. I mean, and we're talking not one side of the neighborhood, but all the way from one side to the other. There's no rhyme or reason, north, south, east, west. I think this is one of the most haunted neighborhoods in the entire country. And Lincoln has been known to be a very haunted city with a lot of Native American ties. And I know that that's kind of like, I know that people go there because of poltergeists and all of this, but I mean, there literally are Native American ties where it was like, either sacred land or land they lived on and used. I'm not going to say it's a burial ground, but I haven't been able to find anything to tie it all together just yet, but I'm still in the process of researching. So there's a little bit of why I do what I do. Pretty much ever since then, I've been chasing that. What the heck is that strong that it could grab me and pull me backwards? And why is that possible when they're not there?
I love that, because I think it's a question, even though I have experienced so much, there is that question, like, really, can something really like get a hold of you and move you? I've been touched, but can you really? So it's fascinating to sit here and hear you explain that, especially coming from a guy. So you're not, I'm assuming, not a scaredy cat, not because you're a guy, but because of the way you explained it. To clarify, I don't want to sound sexist, but anyways, but as you said, you're a big guy too. So to be able to move you like that, that's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. I'm fascinated.
It was truly terrifying. And, the need to want to get my kids out of that situation, it became a must over time. I mean, there were so many other things that we could sit down here for hours and I could give you good stories.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh yeah. I could sit here and do this all day. So I have to ask though, what did you do that particular night? Because I know as you were telling the story, I had a moment trigger in my head when I was back at my childhood home and we were spending the night. And by then I was on my second child. So I was in my 30s. And I thought I had sat back downstairs. And then on the landing, because the hallway light was on up there, the landing, I saw a shadow. And for that split second, I thought it was I think he would have been 9 maybe. So, still kind of a little kid. And I thought, what is he doing up? And then, a millisecond later, you go, that is not my son. That's just a shadow. And it was up too high. It didn't even make sense logically, but there was nothing else it could have been. And I'd seen shadows on that stairs before and I couldn't get up the stairs fast enough. You just blow right through it. just to get to your son. So what did you do with your daughters that night? Did you leave them in their room, or what did you do?
You know, honestly, after it happened, I was kind of shocked, a little bit terrified, but honestly, they were already sleeping. I didn't do much of anything. I sat in the room for longer, made sure that the coast was clear. And to be honest, I kind of like, you get the skeptic's mind. I think a good
Mhm.
amount of skepticism is always necessary.
Yes.
I mean, even as an investigator, and I'm a full believer, I've seen so many things. I'm still skeptical all the time. So I told myself, well,
Mhm.
that didn't happen. And
Yeah.
you start to like shame yourself and tell yourself like there's no possibility that something like that could happen. And so now I'm trying to like figure out like, well, what did grab me? Well, obviously nothing. There was nothing there. So to answer your question is I didn't do anything. I just sat in regret.
Hey, don't feel bad, because I checked on my boy that night and I was like, he's all right. He's fine. And when he was little, I had a baby monitor, and it was our own house. And that was in the time by that point where you had the video monitor, right? And it was black and white. But and I know some would say, no, those weren't orbs. They were, whatever. But they were just circling him in his bed. And I'm watching it. And he was always, I don't want, my kids are pretty private, so I'll be mindful of that. But he used to be very open to things. He's not at this point, as old as he is. But I sat there and I was like, I want to go check it out. And then I'm like, he's fine. I'm not going in there. I'm just watching on the monitor going, he's fine. It's fine. I'm not going in his room. So, okay, Ben. Oh my gosh, Kate, that was awesome. Ben, what have you brought to the
Uh,
table?
Oh, well, I had a story, but now I feel like I have to change it to something else because just to tie into what we're talking about, that piece around moving into houses. I was writing
Mhm.
about this before, actually, about kind of a dichotomy. People often think, oh, old houses have ghosts, new houses don't. And as I'm writing it, I realized, no, all the houses I've lived in, most of them have been over 100 years old. So I can't even talk about new houses because I don't know. Right? Where I come from in the UK, so I'm originally from the United Kingdom. I'm from North Wales, and I moved to Canada when I was 8 years old. And the house that we were in was in the middle of the countryside, way in the mountains of North Wales. And a portion of it was 400 years old, just how the houses over there develop, you build onto, you build onto, you build onto. So it was an old like cottage that had just been added onto, and part of it was 400 years old. And we used to have all sorts of things happening back then. And when I was a kid, I actually used to have hag attacks in that place. I've never experienced them outside of that house, so it really was connected to that
Mhm.
house. And of course, terrifying. Like I would have this weird feeling coming on, and I would see a shadow fall across the floor, and then this
Mhm.
woman would just come, or this female figure would just come and stare at me, and then blank out, wake up the next morning. And what was freaky was my sister would come in and wake me up in the morning. And this was like when I was like 2, 3, 4, right? Really, really young. And she would say sometimes I'd have my eyes open, like I'd be sleeping with my eyes open. And it was completely freak her out because, of course,
Yeah.
to a 13-year-old, she was like, dead.
Yeah.
So it was weird. But that house in particular was a weird place because we actually, like, I had encounter with fairies when I was young, when I was in
Really?
that place. And they're not the
Um,
fairies with the wings. They were just
mhm.
very small, diminutive little Welsh people. And I mean, like, being a
Interesting.
Welsh person myself, I'm not small myself, but like, they looked like they would like little hobbits who were just wearing like, 19th century clothing. And I remember sitting in the garden, and this little man came up to me, a very little Welsh little man, very strong accent, and he'd say, "Hey, what are you doing down there?" And he was like towering over me at this point because I was down on the floor, and they'd just say, "I'm just playing." And so, well, don't make a mess. And then he literally just walked into the verge, just disappeared into the verge. And so I'd see these little
Um,
men walking around sometimes, like throughout the area. And I say that, to my mum, oh, the little men are walking around. What little men? What are you talking about? You know? So
Yeah.
it's interesting. When we moved to Canada, my parents, they bought this 175-year-old stone, like field stone building. It was originally constructed by 40 stonemasons from Germany. They had come over and built many of the houses and the places around the whole area. And it was designed as a brewery. And then in the when the prohibition movement started, and people don't realize in Canada, we had prohibition for a few years ourselves. And then so the brewery shut down after like 40 years of operation. And then it was all sorts of different things. And my parents resurrected it as a brewery because it had a water source down in the basement. And I mean, the place was haunted as well. There were spirits that were constantly in and out of that place. But what was interesting was they were quite calm. And the feeling I always got, and we had a psychic medium come in and do a thing once, and she said, yeah, no, the spirits of this place are calm because this place is back to what it originally was built as. So because you're brewing again, they're feeling calm because it's like status quo for them. And I remember like we had also, we were there, my parents were there for 25 years before they sold it on. And, we had situations where like clocks would start ticking backwards, right? My mum was working one night up in the other side of the building, and it was like 11 o'clock at night because she's workaholic, self-employed. That's what you do when you're self-employed, right? And she looked up from her computer, right? Everybody knows this. She looked up from her computer and she saw her father, who had died a couple of years before, kind of walk like where the glass was. There was a glass door and then like a big open space, and he was stood on the other side of the glass looking in at her. And she was like, I mean, she's like tough as old boots, like Yorkshire, old school English, right? And it just didn't phase her. She thought it was a little weird, so she put her, continued working, like go away. I mean, looked up again, he wasn't there, right? So,
wow.
it was interesting. But I would always hear people whispering, almost like they're, when somebody's behind a door and they're talking, and you can hear that muffled kind of talk. I would constantly be hearing that. Partially because I think the machinery in the building created a lot of white noise. And so from like a ghost hunting perspective, that created the space for that noise to come through. But constantly hearing things. And so it was a very unique place to grow up in both places. It was a really cool thing.
Wow.
And there are like all sorts of other stories connected to those places too.
Oh my gosh.
Like we had somebody who would run very quickly, past some of the windows in the cottage in the UK, and like it would just like you just see this thing, or it's like sometimes if you're watching, you just see this figure run past. But because of the way the windows were, it would just be one window, and you'd expect it to come through the other window, but no. So all little strange things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so wild, and I'm sitting here listening, and I don't know, each of you, as you just did it, right? So when you're listening to somebody else's story, then we get things triggered. We start thinking of other stories. But as I'm listening, I'm like, oh, I forgot about that story. And that story. And I used to own a bowling center. And I'm like, oh, yep, that was haunted too. And we at the time thought, we kind of joked and thought that actually perhaps was my then husband's grandfather, because he used to own it. But I don't know. But that was kind of the thing we talked about back then. But so many things. So question to both of you guys, with your research and your studies and just your investigations and you name it, experiences, any of us that have paid very much attention to the investigation side of the paranormal often tend to hear that certain wooden objects or certain stone can hold some of that energy, or maybe give some energy. What are your thoughts on that? I don't even care who talks, just go for it.
Cain, did you want to go first, or can I?
By all means, take it from here.
Yeah. My experience has been that generally objects can tend to soak up energy. I come from a very animistic point of view where things are not so clear cut when it comes to reality, right? We're only experiencing, the five senses. And so I think it depends on what kind of energy. What often can happen is that those objects will then re-imprint on other people. So people will experience the same object. I've recently been studying witch stones and like objects like that up in Scotland, and how like stones that are said to be like the sites of like where witches have been hung, and then suddenly there's ghosts connected to them, and then suddenly they disappear for like 30 years in the folklore record, and then they come back again and somebody has another sighting. So it's one of those things. I think it's a perpetual thing, but the more we focus on something, the more it develops. And we look at this cross-culturally, like the Japanese shamanism, Japanese Shinto, right? The concept of yokai. The older something is, the more energy it develops and the more sentience it develops because of that. So I that's how I tend to look at things. And so that's one reason why in Japan, for example, they're very good at getting rid of old things so that they don't develop into monsters, right?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think that that's very well spoken. I mean, I think that that's actually really incredible how you kind of go through it. You know, I look at it as more of a regular, simple guys look at it. Okay. I look at it as this is when I investigate a house or something. I mean, the first thing I would tell somebody is if they think that do you have grandma's antiques laying everywhere? Do you have all this stuff? Oh yes, we do. We have her wedding dress. We have all of this. You know, we have all these items and artifacts. And then I'm like, okay, then ask yourself, why do you think you have so much activity going on here? You think that maybe it could be that? Like maybe should you get a storage if you really want them to go away? Should you get a storage and maybe try to remove some of those objects just for now and see if the haunting gets less and less? I don't necessarily think that it's tied to everything. I think that obviously ghosts can be associated to a place and not be ingrained in the objects themselves. But that's merely my theory. I feel like personally, what I feel is that a haunting. I feel like when we die, we're going to figure out that past, present, and future all tie together into one big conglomerate, and so there's no escape of time. So therefore, it's not so weird to think that you know, ghosts from pioneer days and all this stuff are mending with, you know, with Frank, who was a crab who died in his chair. Right. I don't think that it's that out there to think that a place could have multiple spirits, but I also don't think everywhere is haunted either.
Right. I totally agree. And, you know, also the fact that, like, the house I grew up in, which is where, of course, I had my initial experiences, it was I say new, it was probably 30 years old, but no one had died there. There hadn't been any trauma that anyone knew of. And this was a small town. So my parents knew who the original owners were. I believe they bought it from the original owners, if I remember correctly. So it seemed like it wouldn't make sense. However, this was an area Daniel Boone had gone through a lot. I'm sure it was in Indiana. There was got to be a lot of Native American traffic or traffic. That's not what I was looking for. Anyway, y'all. But just experiences and things that happened there. So who knows what it really was and where it was coming from. We did have, because there was a period of time that my oldest son would have been mid-teens, like 16-ish, 15. And we stayed there for a while. And he had the entire upstairs of the home. And I used to have a dance studio. So where that was attached to my parents' home, I stayed there. It wasn't a dance studio anymore, of course. But so my son was upstairs by himself. And a few years after we lived there, he knew there was activity there, right? But we had a conversation when he was an adult about something very dark and heavy and really in a couple of areas of that house that we were very uncomfortable with. And I had not shared that with him. And we both pinpointed the two areas. There was a closet upstairs, and then there was a taller crawl space under one part of the house in the basement. And that you could access from the basement, I should say. And those two areas, I have cold chills talking about it. They were just not a place you wanted to be. You just didn't like it. But I saw some shadows and other things, and lots of things happened, but nothing super scary negative happened there that either one of us could, or my parents could ever come up with. So it's like, what was that? And why would a certain area of a home that nothing had happened in, that we had cleaned that closet out even, and that still was like that energy was there. So it's fascinating. Like, why?
This is the thing. This is what I've come to realize through like really looking at the folklore and the evolution of the folklore over like the past 400 years in the areas that I've looked at, and from personal experience too. I feel like we don't tend to understand the interrelationship between belief and energy, and I think that a lot of people get confused. They either, or not, well, not confused. They fixate on one over the other. A friend of mine has written a load of books on fairies, Celtic fairies in North American folklore, right? Place that has no connection to Ireland, Scotland, any of the old school, right? And yet, when you go into Appalachia, when you go into Nova Scotia, when you go to Newfoundland, right, and any of those like really heavily like Scots-Irish areas, the stories and the experiences, contemporary experiences of people with fairies and with ghosts and with other spirits often are very similar to what you see in the old world, even though it's in this landscape over here, which is Native American landscape, right? So there's this idea. I do truly believe that, like white noise machines, where there is creating that bubble in order for spirits and energy to manipulate. I do believe that we also project through belief a certain energy out there that then energy can take form. And I think that really helps, at least for me, to explain kind of why then stories seem to change over the span of a few hundred years, right? I'll give you a very clear example. I live in a little place called Wyerton, Ontario. And Wyerton, Ontario is, apart from being like close to the beach and up near Lake Huron here, it's also the home of Wyerton Willie, which is our local Canadian groundhog that on February 2nd will say, like Poxitani Phil, right? Same tradition, same thing, really emerges out of German folklore, but was a creation 100 years ago from some guy in a bar who was trying to impress a news reporter from Toronto, right? And yet, when you come into town here, you've got the physical, like, groundhog, who is one of the lineage of groundhogs that is called Wyerton Willie. They have a whole festival. People, like, he's everywhere. He's become the genius loci of this place. Now, the question is, and psychics have come here and they find that sometimes their skills are enhanced because they're in a place which is divination, like, which is fortune, like it's a place that this little groundhog tries and tells the future with, right? So what does that say? Well, that says there's a belief going on here. And I think with ghosts in particular, you see this when you go to certain parts of like North America that are heavily Spanish or Hispanic infused, right? The culture, you like, it would be easy for La Llorona. You completely think, oh yeah, La Llorona would appear around the corner anytime. You go into other parts like French Canadian or French, Creole, and you get a sense of these French spirits, this like luxuriousness, like, I think that belief has a lot to do with it, I think.
Yeah, I think so. But then there is the fascinating aspect of when you have an experience and you were not a believer in any of those things, or you maybe are religious in one direction or another, and you have an experience that completely contradicts it.
So this is the thing. This is what I'm trying to say, is that it doesn't matter if individual believers are happening. If there's enough belief happening in a space, it impacts that whole space, right? So it's kind of interesting. I've experienced that myself, to be honest. Yeah.
I think there's something to that. I mean, I had a guy from Chicago who calls himself Ed the Pagan, and he's a pretty famous guy, and like he has like a witch school and all this, and he talks
Ed
about
Hubbard.
Yeah, Ed Hubbard, you know him. Well,
Ed Hubbard, I do know him.
Ed Hubbard, yeah. I like to call him Ed the Pagan because that's what he but yes, Ed, he's a super guy to talk to, but he talks about this type of thing. He talks about the collective idea of something, right? If everybody kind of puts their mind to the collective, and maybe I'm off base here, but I think that it kind of ties into what you're saying, Ben. I think that there's a collective there of not just an individual, but like a massive amount of belief can bring on the story. He even thinks that it conjures it up in a certain way where you can actually, if everybody puts their mind to something, you could actually bring an entity forth. So, I mean, I don't know. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, yes and no, but I'm glad that you brought them up. There is a technical term, egregore and servitor, right? This idea of the collective group. And I know from like more scientific standpoint, like spiritualists and spiritists have done experiments in that group think, particularly the table tapping, which is creates. But for me, like, I always wonder then, what is the difference between kind of then a deceased human spirit or deceased spirit that is jumping onto that kind of group energy, or is it just a creation of that group that doesn't exist once that group disappears? Where's the boundaries that zone, right? And I know with transpersonal psychology, Jung has talked about this too, right?
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Oh my gosh, you guys, we could talk about this all day. There's so much. It's so fascinating. And the nerd in me, no offense, don't take that offensively, Ben, but the nerd and the geek in me wants to go down the rabbit hole onto the academic side of it, which obviously Cain's like, wait, I'm just the average Cain over here. But it's a fascinating component because everybody had, well, lots and lots and lots of people have questions. And I think that we simply can't wrap the human mind around what really is, whatever it is. And then we could get into the science of, hey, it's the observer effect, right? Like when we observe something, it may react differently than if somebody else sees it or feels it or senses it. It may be totally different. Their experience can be different. So there's so many things. I got to go one more direction with this, and then I try to keep the episode short, but this is such a fun topic. So we think of so often ghosts as being humans. Not always do we hear of people talking about animals showing up again, or hearing them, or seeing them, or sensing them, right? How often have you guys, or have you encountered that? And I'm not talking about like some creepy demon thing that we don't know what it is or something like that. I'm talking literally about like, hey, my dog died and I swear I heard him walk through the house or something like that.
Well, for me in the house that I'm currently in, and trust me, not every house that I've been in is haunted, but I will say I have activity. I don't know if things follow me around because I do investigation. I don't know. But anyways, so the house that I live in currently, the landlord, it was their original house. Okay. People have died here. Their dad died here. Animals have died here. Well, in my studio that I'm sitting in right now, I have had times, and I have two little dogs. I have a cockapoo and I have another poodle mutt type. Okay. I have seen, not just out of my peripheral vision, I have seen something where I can physically see like something small and white in the size of an animal, and I will peer over and I will think it's my dog Teddy, and I will look over again and there will be nothing there. I will even get nudged in my leg just like the dogs do. I'll look down and there'll be nothing there. I'll get poked in the side like they do when they want something, and there'll be nothing there. And I have to ask myself then, is it a very small entity? Is it a child? Is whatever the entity could be, are they just not able to manifest in a bigger way, where full size, or are they an animal? I seem to think that it could be a deceased pet of theirs, like a deceased, I know they had a cockapoo or a poodle mixture that died here years ago, so maybe it's it. Maybe my dogs constantly follow something around all the time, growling, chasing it up the stairs. So I'm led to believe that maybe we have a ghost dog here.
Oh, that's fascinating. Your thoughts, Ben?
I don't know if I should go the academic route or talk personally, so I'll just do both. I have experienced animal spirits, mostly my own animal spirits. A couple of years ago, the family dog needed to be put to sleep, and she was only 6. She was a Bernese Mountain Dog though, and so they tend not to last that long. really beautiful dog. And my
Mhm.
my mum and dad couldn't do it. They were like, no, we can't do it, we can't do it. So I happened to be up that day, and I went with her, and I sat with her, and I sat with her while they did it. And I remember saying, because I mean, I work with spirits, right? I work with ancestral spirits in various traditions, right? So for me, contacting the dead is not an issue. So I called to one of our previous pets, who's kind of like the old patriarch. He was like 17 when he passed. He was this little tiny little Jack Russell. He was an
Oh.
old man even when he was young, right? And they said, Oscar, I really need you to come and get her. Like, come and get her, right? And so I had this sensation that he ran from the field and was sat next to us while it was happening, and then they went. And when I see him again, I'm going to thank him for that, because that was such a good thing. But for me, like every time one of our pets, and we've had about 4 or 5 pets while in Canada, have passed, every single time I've heard them, and I've experienced them, I think that it's culturally based, that we don't tend to think of pets as ghosts. Because when you look around the world, you often will encounter stories. One of my favorites that I found when I was writing my own book was the disaster in Fukushima, in the nuclear power plant after the tsunami in Japan. There's all these stories of things that emerged out of the zone. Right. So in the zone around the power plant, they of course, people didn't know how long they were going to go. They evacuated. They left their pets at home because they didn't think they were going to be gone that long, right? And a lot of them unfortunately passed away because their people either were killed because of the tsunami, or they just couldn't return. And so there was a story in a book called Ghosts of the Tsunami, which is a really fantastic look at one of the disasters with one of the schools over there, why, this school couldn't get their act together, and why, like 100 of children died when there was a hill right next door that they could have gone up, right? So the writer was talking about a Catholic priest and a Shinto Buddhist monk had come together because they were having problems with people in the area being possessed by spirits. And a lot of these spirits were the deceased individuals who had died during the tsunami. They couldn't find their way. They were confused. They just didn't know what to do. And this one woman that they went to help, they managed to, like, she was starting to get epileptic seizures and would just go into full trance possession, and people were really, of course, very concerned for her in her life. So they brought in this monk and this priest, and they both performed this combined ceremony, and they got the spirit, at least they believed it was a spirit, they got the spirit to talk, and the spirit said, I was a dog that was left behind, and I keep looking for my owner, and this woman looked like my owner. So of course I came into her, right? And the dog explained how during one of the kind of rescue missions, an organization sent people in as a rescue mission to gather up dogs to take them out of the zone. The dog had already died, but it was still in its body, and saw that people were looking in through the windows at it, but it couldn't bark to say come, right? So after they put the dog to, like, they put the spirit to rest, laid it, and sent it off into the next life, the woman was fine. So, and there's tons of stories. So I think that it's very
that is
cultural.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
so.
it's culturally based.
I know my first experiences were pets. We had, I'm a Gen Xer, so Morris the cat, the yellow tabby cat from the 80s, all her 70s, I don't even remember, but I think probably 70s. But we had a yellow tabby that showed up, and of course, me being a little kid, I was the one that got to name him. I named him Morris because it made sense. He looked just like him, but he ended up being kind of a heavy. He was a little bigger cat. He's kind of fat. And so when he passed, we would hear, and we had an old farmhouse, and you would hear him jump out of the window upstairs, thud, and then you'd hear him boom, 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 run down the stairs like he used to do. And even my dad heard that. Even my dad, he couldn't deny that, but we would all hear that. And so my first experiences were mainly of that particular cat. And then I had this gorgeous, she was half Siamese, and she was pure black, but to look at her, you would know she was a Siamese cat, right? Because just the body shape is just really obvious. But just this silky, shiny black. Well, we lived on a busy county road, and I still let her out a lot. And so she got hit, I found her the next day. Very sad. And a few days later, or I don't know when it was, could have been a couple months, I don't remember, but one of my girlfriends from high school was hanging out, spending the night with me. And she was like, "What is that?" Because she felt this cat walking around our feet on my bed. And I said, "That's my cat." And she's like, "No, no, 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 no. Your cat died." And I'm like, "I know. She about come unglued." But I'm like, "Yep." She showed up for a while after that. And because she was just always on my bed. And so you couldn't deny it, you know, there it was there. But yeah, so it's just fascinating. So many fascinating things that, and so many experiences that I think if people would be more open to the possibilities and perhaps not, obviously there are some things to be scared of, but not to be as fearful. Not everything's scary, right?
No.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, you guys, I have another show to go record so I can share with everybody, but I wish we could just sit here and talk forever because I just love this conversation. So I want to thank you both for coming on and being a part of it. Will you please give a shout out where people can find you, or, you know, where your podcasts are, things like that? Cain, will you share with us? And of course, I will put links in the show notes as well. I mean,
Of course, you can find me on the Cain Stevens Super Show. I'm obviously on everything that you guys are probably on. I'm on Spotify, Apple, everywhere that has podcasts. I'm also on another podcast called Scratch the Vinyl, where we talk music. We talk about just a lot of different but mostly just music. And then I'm a recording artist, so if you want to listen to me, look up Cain Stevens out there. I have a new single coming out in October called "Haunt You." Which will be perfect for this type of thing. And
yeah.
so hope you guys check it out. I hope you guys enjoy what I do and just keep having these conversations. This is why I do this. It's so important to have these conversations about the paranormal so that we make it a normal thing so that people aren't scared anymore.
I agree. Oh my gosh. And make sure that you share that when it does get released, your album, let me know. And I'll go back and add that to the links as well. All right, Ben.
Yes. So you can find everything of what I do at benstimpson.com. And my podcast is on there, my books are on there, all my little musings are on there. And my YouTube channel has all of the episodes as well as Spotify and all of that. I mostly interview other pagan authors and other spiritual authors. I have Matt Oren on. I've got like some of the bigger names like Devin Hunter, who were both readers in Salem, Massachusetts. So go and check those out. Those are really wonderful episodes. I highly recommend them. And otherwise, thank you so much for having us on. It was a really joy to meet with you both.
Oh, it was amazing. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Thank you. I guess I appreciate it so much. So everybody watching or listening, if you want to hear more ghost stories from my end of things, it's only going to be hanging out in October. So, but we will have one every Wednesday, of course. So cartwheels and banana peels, and you can learn all about me. Cartwheelsandbananapeels.com. It's not that difficult to find me. But yeah, the podcast is everywhere on YouTube as well. So super exciting. So amazing. Share your stories. You guys, don't be afraid to share the stories. Some people will look at you and go, "Oh my God, you're crazy." But find those people that are willing to listen because it shouldn't be scary. It's just do our best to understand it / accept it. All right, everybody, we are out of here. Talk to you later.